everybody.
Hey, Bob.
Yes, I'm Bob Stadler. I'm Director of Communications and Engagement for MotorCities National Heritage Area. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to MotorCities on the Road. This is episode 26 of this program series that we originally created during the pandemic as MotorCities at Home. Because in 2020, everybody was stuck at home and people were looking for every opportunity to do something online, learn a thing or two, and we moved into that void with a program series that brings our mission to people, more people. And, you know, as we started to emerge out of the pandemic a couple of years ago, we thought, this is a great event series, and we'd like to do something more with it. So we rebranded it as MotorCities on the Road. And this gives us an opportunity to share our partners, our partner attractions, and really see how the mission of MotorCities of preserving and promoting and interpreting our region's automotive and labor heritage, and how that can be done in the new world order, post-COVID order. So I'm happy to have you here tonight at our newest, we're so excited, our newest automotive history attraction in our 16-county MotorCities National Heritage Area. And I'm going to bring up Terry in just a couple minutes, but before I do, for our online audience, for our streaming audience, I want to just say hello to those folks and give you just a quick overview of MotorCities. We were established in 1998, so we are fresh off the celebration of our 25th anniversary in 1993, November of 1993 to be exact, or 1998, excuse me. In 2023, we celebrate 25 years. You know, we are a private nonprofit. We are part of a National Heritage Area system of the National Park Service. So, you know, we've got some clout. We're one of 62 National Heritage Areas around the country. And when I started 6.5 years ago, there were 45 National Heritage Areas. So the National Heritage Area movement is a growing movement, and it's becoming a bigger part of National Park Service as well. So how many of you, I'm guessing most of you will raise your hand, but how many of you know or knew that you were standing in a National Heritage Area today? Okay, I was hoping it'd be most of you. So we're dedicated to preserving, interpreting, and promoting our region's automotive and labor heritage, and we do that while respecting our diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. And like I said, we have 16 counties. It's not just Motor City, it truly is MotorCities, because we have Flint, the birthplace of General Motors. We have the capital area, Lansing and RE Olds, and all the great things that happen there. We actually go all the way west to Kalamazoo, in Kalamazoo County, where they made yellow cabs. And our wonderful western outpost, the Gilmore Car Museum in Hickory Corners. If you haven't been out there, you gotta make the trip. So, again, if you like what you hear tonight, you want to be part of MotorCities, there's a lot of ways to do that. Our website is motorcities.org. We have very robust social media. We're streaming live on Facebook right now. We have almost 26,000 followers on Facebook. So it's a very lively group. A lot of our daily history posts get a lot of people commenting and sharing their thoughts about our automotive history and some of the great cars that have been made in this National Heritage Area over more than a century. And if you really, really like what you hear tonight, you can actually become a member of MotorCities and help us in our mission to continue to preserve and promote and interpret our automotive and labor heritage in our 16 counties of Lower Michigan. So now, the Pontiac Transportation Museum just opened to the public for the first time on May 16th. So you guys are among the very first people to have this opportunity to see this fledgling operation as it gets started. And one of the prime movers behind making this museum a reality is Terry Connolly. He grew up in central New York State near Syracuse, received a Bachelor of Science degree in Mechanical Engineering from Princeton University in 1979, earned an MBA from Stanford, has more than 40 years in engineering and product development in the automotive industry. Surprisingly, he started his career with GM's Pontiac division in 1979, focusing on chassis and powertrain development, and progressed through a lengthy array of technical positions in the vehicle and automotive supplier community. He's also been a lecturer at the University of Michigan, and he is the board chairman of this newly opened Pontiac Transportation Museum. So to tell you more about how this came to be, what's still to come, and what is happening right now, and lead you on a tour after his remarks, here's Terry Connolly.
Thank you much to Bob. And by the way, I want to introduce a couple other people here too. And why don't you guys come up here as well. So Tim Dye, many of you know Tim by reputation, hopefully you do. He's run the Pontiac Oakland Museum and Resource Center in Pontiac, Illinois for the last 15 years. And he is Mr. Pontiac in Oakland, knows everything there is to know about those brands, and actually intends to be up here. It was always his dream to set this thing up in Pontiac, Michigan, and intends to be up here. And then Larry Mihalko is another counterpart of mine that started at Pontiac Engineering and has become kind of a very key person here with some of the really neat displays that you'll see on the floor here. But Larry and I have worked together for, 45 years, I guess, and have this background of starting this.
Yeah, we were new college graduates in Pontiac Engineering together. I think we were roommates for 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah. So great. I guess I'll do the talking here. These guys are going to be critical as we get the people around on the tour. And the other thing I should say up front is thanks to MotorCities, because getting a museum off the ground, I think we found is a very heavy lift. And MotorCities has been there the whole time, and some of it's been money. The money, it isn't huge amounts, but it came at critical times and for critical things. And the connections are really important that I think MotorCities has provided. So one of the first things to know about where the museum's going is actually that not quite that fast. It's all about things wheeled in Pontiac. So that starts with carriages, it goes through motorized bicycles, goes through amphibious trucks, and so it's not just about the Pontiac brand. And then it's all about people, the machines obviously, which a lot of us are very interested in, but the social history of how those things interacted and how it engaged the whole community. So we really want this to appeal not just to people that are, pops the hood, I want to see under the hood, but people that are really interested in the whole social aspect of how this shaped the region's history. And I'll probably go 35 minutes here or something. I'm presuming you guys want a fairly deep dive, but then we'll get you out walking around. So there's about 170 years of history here. 44, I'll tell you the actual number is 47 distinct companies that built or sold wheeled vehicles, which is about tenfold more than I ever knew there were until about 5 or 6 years ago. 35 marketed brands, 24 types of transportation vehicles, and again, I'm talking huge variety of types of transportation vehicles, 20 million cars and trucks produced, a lot of Pontiac built subsystems, 2.5 million Model T bodies as an example, and many automotive tier 1 suppliers are actually still operating around Pontiac. As a bunch of you in Michigan probably understand, the Erie Canal was sort of critical to our growth in this state. And what happened was, stereotypically, Eastern Western Europeans got on a canal boat after they'd landed in New York Harbor. They went across the Erie Canal, they got on a sailing ship, later on a steamship, and they landed in Detroit, typically, as they got across Lake Erie. This was not a small migration of people. 2,100 people a day at the turn of the 20th century coming into Detroit. And so they had all their family belongings with them, trunks and all that stuff, and they were headed to, who knows, Minnesota, Wisconsin. So what did they need? They needed a carriage really bad. Oakland County had a lot of oak, had skilled craftsmen, people were headed west. So selling carriages got to be a huge deal for, obviously, not just Pontiac, but Flint as well. In fact, between the two of them, about 25% of the entire U.S. carriage industry. And as Pontiac was basically commissioned as a manufacturing town, they gave land grants to people that were called termed mechanics. They didn't give land grants to people that were agricultural focused. And Pontiac had a mill pond in the center of town, had water power. It had been an Indian Native American trail intersection for a couple hundred years before this. Had the railroads by 1840, had 4 different railroads, by the way. I had streetcar connections to all the major cities in southeastern Michigan. So it was ripe to become a business center. And it actually grew to be the largest so-called inland city in the Michigan Territory, region west of Detroit, with that comment. And by 1900, about 3/4 of the adult population in Pontiac worked in the carriage industry, either parts or assembling carriages. This is the carriage sort of litany of manufacturers, 16 manufacturers that we know of that did carriages in Pontiac. There's actually 1 or 2 others that are not on the list. I won't ask you to memorize these things. I just sort of said it to you for breath. We'll talk about some of the key ones, the Pontiac Spring and Wagon Works and Bodette and Pontiac Buggy and so forth. The Pontiac Spring and Wagon Works was a 5 building complex that existed just north of where M1 Concourse is today. And at one point, it was the largest industrial site in the country west of Detroit. It started in carriage building, got its fingers into early truck builds, early car builds, and multiple brands of cars that you'll see on our floor here. One of the buildings in the complex actually still exists in the Spring and Wagon Works. Standard Carriage was another kind of an interesting manufacturer. You'll see a Standard Carriage on the floor. This one also has its origin still standing. The building stands along Woodward and Osmond Avenue here. And they had the fortune or misfortune, or they started in the carriage business in, I think, 1898. By 1905, you couldn't give away a carriage. And so it was so much short-lived, but we laugh because they probably had the highest up-to-date manufacturing facility of any of the carriage manufacturers. Pontiac Buggy is one that you'll hear more about in the course of wandering around. So Ed Murphy started Pontiac Buggy in 1893. Quickly grew to be a very significant player in the carriage industry. That upper left picture is an artist rendition, obviously, but it shows you the magnitude of the facility. That's a locomotive steaming away in front of the building. And I think there's some exaggeration there, but it was a very big facility. Right up here, about 1/3 of a mile northeast of here, at the head of the Woodward Loop, Pontiac, Baldwin, and Caesar Chavez. The later Oakland headquarters building still stands there. There aren't a lot of pictures from inside the carriage manufacturers, and there aren't a lot of carriage buildings that still exist because they made a lot of sawdust and people smoked, and that was a really bad combination if you read the Pontiac press from those days. A lot of big fires. O.J. Bodette was another big one. This is the guy that built 2.5 million Model T bodies. He was the biggest bodybuilder for Henry Ford. That facility that you see in the picture was about probably 1/3 of a mile south of here, right where the Wesson tennis place is today. In fact, Bodette and his son built some mansions that are basically adjacent to this property that still exists here. And what happened to Bodette eventually was they had a huge fire and the assets were bought out by Fisher Body. Let me skip that one for brevity. A.G. North and Harry Hamilton were kind of the principals behind the Spring and Wagon Works. you see a picture of what their facility looked like kind of in its heyday. Harry Hamilton actually went on to be a board of directors guy for GM. North was more the technical guy, Hamilton was more the business guy. As I mentioned, there's some remnants in Pontiac you can drive around and see today, like the Spring and Wagon Works facility. The Rapid Powerhouse, I'll talk about Rapid in a second, is still there in the Standard Carriage building. And we actually have a fair amount of interest from people at the museum so far, walking around, not walking around, but driving around Pontiac and seeing those facilities and other things, just really interesting. But let me talk about early cars. And again, there's going to be more brands here probably than most of you have heard of before. And some of significant, some probably lost to history and less significant. But obviously the ones that are really critical are going to be the Oakland Pontiac kind of family here. But you'll see a bunch of others. And largely, we have some significant artifacts in our collection that represent some of these other ones. You walked right by the 1908 Pontiac Runabout. This is actually the first car built by the Spring and Wagon Works. It has nothing to do with Pontiac division of GM. I actually preceded it by 17 years, I guess. And not an overly successful car, about 200 of these built. And that is one of 5 that exists out there. Probably the best condition and most detailed history that anybody has on any of the 5. There's Ed Murphy, again, started the Pontiac Buggy Company. By 1907, he started Oakland Motor Company. Very successful businessman, very respected in Pontiac, and in all respects. He was apparently quite a class act. His old mansion is on the east side of Pontiac. Unfortunately, not in very good shape right now, but a big name around town. So he started Oakland, and then guess who came to town? Billy Durant came to town with a big bag of money and bought Oakland in 1909, and he bought half of it, and then Murphy died kind of unexpectedly, and then he bought the other half of it. So it became Oakland division of GM by 1909. There's a bunch of pictures in the GM archives of Oakland Assembly in 1911, which are fascinating pictures. But Oakland was immediately a pretty successful organization. Grew to sell about 40,000 cars a year. It sold fairly upscale cars, which gets important to the story here in a few minutes. Lots of other brands that you may or may not have heard of. The Welch motor car was a pretty high-profile, high-technology thing that Allie and Fred Welch started. I think there's 2 of these that still exist, and we're actually hoping we're going to have one on loan here this fall, which will be a really cool thing to have. Walter Flanders, you'll see an artifact on the floor from the Flanders Electric. So Pontiac built electric cars in 1912 and 1913. Flanders was very high profile. Some of you know of his background in the auto industry. I mean, he worked for Henry Ford, then he went off and started EMF with a couple other folks, and then he built Flanders gasoline powered cars, then he got into electrics, later did motorcycles. But this electric was quite high profile. It was the Glidden Pathfinder, the Glidden Tour Pathfinder, which is what that upper picture was. It's the first car we believe was advertised in a nighttime lighting situation here. But it fundamentally was really expensive when it came to market and didn't do anything. They probably only built about 100 of them, and there's only one artifact left, which you see on the floor. Byron Carter built cars in Pontiac in 1905 to 1915. One of the perspectives you get on Pontiac is he started building Carter cars in Jackson, but everybody was moving to Pontiac basically in the 1905, 6, 7 timeframe. It was a hop in place, like the Silicon Valley of the U.S., kind of a hop in place. And so Carter car again attracted. There's this guy hanging out in Pontiac named Billy Durant, attracted his attention. So he bought Carter car too. Became Carter car division of GM, and we believe it was attractive to Durant and GM because it's got a continuously variable transmission that you'll see in some of our artifacts out there. It's kind of interesting thing, but basically GM decided to close it in 1915. And there's esoteric others. You'll see the Grabowski, you'll see the Olympian, etc. And I won't try to detail all that stuff. It would take us far too long. One of the perspectives I always put on this for people is because of the success of the carriage industry, you had multiple suppliers at Pontiac that did everything from springs, castings, forgings, wood structure, etc. All the elements were in place. So as soon as somebody was able to bring a commercialized powertrain to market, that's kind of made Pontiac really right to explode with vehicle manufacturing. And so I'm going to find my favorite picture here. That's President Taft motoring up Saginaw Street downtown Pontiac in the 1912 Oakland. In fact, we got a 1912 Oakland on the floor, you'll see it as well. I tell people he undoubtedly came like any politician for votes, but this was like a Silicon Valley kind of a situation. There was a lot going on in Pontiac, which is what drew people like Taft to Pontiac. So some of you know this story, and credit to Larry Mahalko for some of the interesting research that we stumbled on. So the GM divisiveness in divisions goes way back. Alfred Sloan was kind of looking across town at Ford with 90% of the market, came up with this strategy of companion brands. Most of you probably know about that. The LaSalle is being probably the most prominent one that people know about, less than 13 years. Well, the first companion brand, Sloan basically proclaimed to Oakland, he wanted them to do a companion brand that was going to be called Pontiac. And it was very targeted. I mean, some of Larry's research is great. It's very targeted to, it needs to be closed body, it needs to be 6-cylinder. And Oakland said, nah, boss, we sell upscale cars. This would be a bad deal for us. And it turns out Sloan was actually able to then hire an outside chief engineer, a guy named Benjamin Annabelle, used some of the Chevy component set, had him engineer the car, brought it back to Oakland and said, now read my lips, you're going to sell this car. And Sloan called the market like perfectly. Sorry, this is more on Benjamin Annabelle, which is I won't go into this just for brevity, but this guy's a really heavily decorated in patent and so forth contributor, and lasted at Pontiac, I think, until 1947. And there's actually some stuff around Michigan named after him. But so Sloan brought the thing back to Oakland. They launched in 1926 at the New York Auto Show. This picture's outside the Waldorf Astoria, and that's Sloan and Glancy, the general manager of Oakland. And they brought along the Native American Drive. And fortunately, Pontiac's been very respectful, and obviously the name of the vehicle was to show respect for the famed Indian chief. But it was, it's sort of I'll say maybe the most successful automotive launch that had ever happened to that date, because they sold 70,000 cars the first year. And remember, Oakland was selling about 40,000 cars a year. That's what 26 Pontiac looks like. You'll see a 27 on our floor here. Delivered on exactly what Sloan was asking them to do. And upscale of the Model T, but more expensive as well. So that obviously created this huge manufacturing problem. The Oakland headquarters building, which was that blue dot in the center of the picture, and its complex was too small to manufacture all this stuff. They bought a square mile of land on the north side of Pontiac and started moving there and built a huge manufacturing facility that you'll see pictures of here in a second. It was the largest single construction project in the United States in 1926-27. And remember that, because I'll tell you another reference here in a few slides that's similar. And it drew foreign dignitaries and competitors at its opening event. It was called the Daylight Plant because it had more daylight opening and glass and so forth that plants typically had. And it had this uniqueness, somewhat unique thing in the industry where the body was built adjacent to the chassis and assembly, which seems trite at this point in time, but that was a big deal because carriage manufacturers were making bodies and they weren't always located next to the chassis assembler. It's also the first, that Fisher body plant on the upper right is also the first place that color was painted in volume in the industry because GM and DuPont had invented a paint that dried in about 3 hours, which made inventory different colors much more feasible. So, some of you know this whole story, then the Pontiac growth continued to eclipse Oakland, and Oakland sort of ran into the depression as did the higher priced brands. And so basically, GM just renamed the division Pontiac Division from Oakland Division. So let me go back from there and back up to trucks. So this is probably a longer list of truck brands than you might have imagined in Pontiac. Most of them get related pretty quickly to GMC, but there are some that were totally unique from GMC, and again, I won't ask you to memorize that list at all. Rapid Truck started originally in Detroit in 1902, moved to Pontiac in 1904, probably to take advantage of the whole Pontiac Spring Wagon Works facility, because again, remarkable facility and had their fingers in a lot of the stuff. And that's where the truck business basically grew. Pontiac grew to include commercial trucks, medium, heavy duties, coaches, RVs, etc. And Rapid Truck by here was operating in 1904. By 1905 was shipping to Europe from Pontiac. A very successful commercial truck for its time frame. Max and Morris Grabowski were the two principals that started Rapid Truck, two Jewish immigrant brothers. And they built obviously it's a commercial chassis, they built all kinds of bodies on top of that. But what happened to them, again, was Billy Grant spending time in Pontiac and buys Rapid, combines it with Reliance and with Randolph to make GMC. Rapid was by far the biggest of those. Reliance and Randolph were heavier duty trucks than Rapid was trying to sell. And it's really interesting when you go back in this day to see kind of how in 1912 GM was trying to sell trucks, because it is very, sort of cold hard business case to sell this against you need a driver. You displace 16 horses and 4 drivers and 4 wagons if you got 1 driver and 1 truck here. So it's just an interesting perspective on the time. GM built electrics in Pontiac 1912 to 1916. Not that many, and we don't think there's any of the artifacts that exist from those electric trucks. So then GMC was going through its own series of sort of explosive growth. And in 1927, the largest single construction project in the U.S. was on the south side of Pontiac, where they were building the truck plant, which is what that steam shell was doing and so forth there. And one of the things I always say on the slide is that the military had already gotten attracted to the strength of the GMC operations. That Doughboy convoy is in 1917 going down Woodward Avenue. If you can believe that, where they picked up a convoy of trucks from the truck plant. There were other truck brands like Columbia that basically failed in the face of GMC. Columbia was on the east side of Pontiac. And the GMC growth, the upper plant pictured there is what started off as the Rapid Truck plant, became the GMC home plant. The lower facility is along South Boulevard, and what the so-called Plant 2, which is what that steam shovel was building, looked like early on. And that continued to grow. The Plant 2 and South Boulevard complex looked like this in the 50s. Had grown to be a huge operation. And this is just one of 3 truck assembly plants in the city of Pontiac. There were 2 car plants and 3 truck assembly plants within the city bounds. So all types of trucks, not that many light duties, but obviously some interesting light duties as well. The original Rapid site then became Pontiac West for GM, the Pontiac West assembly plant, then became a validation center. Today it's M1 Concourse is what's on that site today. Pontiac East was the 3rd of those assembly plants, basically on Uptech Road. That's actually closed in 2007, I think. And has been fully repurposed at this point in time. There's actually new industry that's going in that same site. So 100 years of trucks built on the south side of Pontiac of all types. And GM had obviously expanded the truck business into a bunch of other places. And I'll talk about some of this stuff, but probably not all of it here. So the Parade of Progress, the first Parade of Progress concept date was 1936. You guys probably know this, the 1939. Oh, let me keep going here. GM built trailer-bout trailers in their plant as they were sort of expanding their business. This was 37, 38, 39. Then you probably know more about the 39 Future Liners, which was a huge transportation vision that GM sort of portrayed to the world. I think the bodies were built at Cadillac, but the assembly and chassis and so forth stuff was done in Pontiac. Probably the most famous show vehicles built in a lot of respects that the industry's built. Led Pontiac into 50 years of coach builds, including things like the scenic cruiser models, which are sort of much beloved. They built obviously coaches before these ones shown, but about 6 generations here of coaches. And the coach business lasted for GM basically into the early 80s. I think by the early 70s, there was much litigation with the Department of Justice, and eventually GM was found in restraint of trade by having on the order of 80% of the transit buses in the country built in Pontiac. If you're in the Ford Museum, look at the Rosa Parks bus because it says made in Pontiac on the front step and has most of the historic buses you'll see well. Motorhomes, you'll see our GMC motorhome on the floor here. Pretty significant piece of technology for 1973 through 78. After 50 years, we ran the 50th anniversary of the motorhome last fall. 65% of them are still on the road. Pretty amazing in 50 years. People love these things. It was kind of a technology tour de force, front-wheel drive, independent rear suspension, fiberglass body, upper aluminum structure, etc. So again, a lot of restoration continues on motorhomes. They could use, you'll see them at U of M tailgates and all that kind of stuff. You'll see a Vixen on our floor. This is an interesting vehicle. 7-foot overall height, goes in through a standard garage door, has a pop top on it, and again, you'll see the details. So a garageable motorhome. Interesting background of that from my perspective is Bill Collins. Some of you know Bill Collins' background, kind of the original technical architect of GTO, 64 GTO, and the Road Drive Tempest and so forth. And in fact, when DeLorean wanted the chief engineer, he went and got Bill Collins to be his chief engineer. But Bill Collins later then started Vixen Motor Company, and he knew exactly what he was targeting that Vixen to be, which was very different than most motorhomes. Whizzers, you'll see a Whizzer, 2 Whizzers on our floor, built in Pontiac 46 to 66. This is the largest volume motorized bicycle in the country. And motorized bicycles were a big deal. It was kind of every schoolboy's aspiration, I think, in the early 50s to have a Whizzer. James Dean's first motorcycle was a Whizzer, believe it or not. And Whizzers, particularly during World War II, it was kind of a big deal during World War II because that was the only transportation company allowed to operate during World War II. Everybody else converted to armaments. Pontiac does some unique motorcycles today, most conversion-related stuff, but really unique stuff. Military history. We don't have enough on the floor to show on this, mostly because it's big and we don't have a door big enough to get it in the building quite yet. But we're going there. But the manufacturing conversion in Pontiac is really a thing of beauty, and I think everybody understands that the history would say that the manufacturing conversion in the U.S. is what won World War II. Pontiac was a huge part of that. That thing on the right-hand side is an advertorial that Pontiac was running at the time, about going from building buggies to cars to weapons. This guy, Big Bill Knudsen, was the guy that was drafted by FBR as a 2-star general. He was the chief operating officer of General Motors, very familiar with Pontiac operations. Got drafted to be the overall arsenal of democracy guy, which is a great story overall to follow on, by the way. So he did not just the automotive conversion, but Liberty bomber, or Liberty ships and Liberator bombers and so forth. So Pontiac, built in Pontiac, were 360,000 deuce-and-a-half trucks. St. Louis built another 160,000 that had been engineered in Pontiac. This is the vehicle that Patton called the true hero of World War II. Pretty good praise to be the true hero of World War II. 26,000 ducks, and which are obviously still much beloved today, I think. The changeover, as happened in many other cities, was remarkable and produced remarkable volume. On the north side of town, airdrop torpedoes were a big product. As were Orlican guns and Beaufort's field cannons and so forth came out of the north side of Pontiac. As you guys understand too, mainly stuff that's built by the women of Pontiac. It's a huge women empowerment story. So along in 1955 came Bunky Knudsen. This is William Knudsen's son, appointed general manager of Pontiac. He is famous for this adage of you can sell a young man's car to an old man, but you can't sell an old man's car to a young man. Now, I got to tell a side story here, which is really funny to me. So Bunky's daughters, who are both in their mid and late 80s, were here maybe 2 or 3 months ago and doing a joint interview for us. And so I asked the older daughter, tell me about, your dad is famed for knowing everything about what young people want and so forth. And you know, what did you think? How'd that work? She goes, well, I was 17 in 1955 when he got appointed. She goes, I was driving this 265 Chevy to high school, and I was hot stuff. And Dad came home and he said, you got to start driving this Pontiac. And I told him, that's an old man's car. And I was like, bingo, she's the one that generated the quote. It was pretty funny. So Knudsen quickly went out and found DeLorean at Packard and Pete Estes for Oldsmobile, and they went on a total roll. So 4 Motor Trend Car of the Year awards out of the 10 in the next decade. Went from about number 7 in the industry to number 3 in the industry. Rode the muscle car bandwagon big time, obviously. Powertrain innovation was a big part of it. Mac McKellar was a big part of it. Pete Estes himself was a powertrain guy. You know, hats off to the styling and lifestyle advertising. I think the marketing people really had their finger on the pulse of how to market stuff in the 60s as well. And the advertising firm probably deserves a fair amount of credit as well. So that going from number 7 to number 3 comes with a lot of growth. This is that square mile of manufacturing facility that they bought in 1926. And it became 10.8 million square feet under roof, employed about 25,000 at peak. It's not even all on the page here, to be honest, like the engineering and admin buildings and the Fisher Body building are somewhat off the page. And if you know Pontiac, that, by the way, that blue thing is the Grand Trunk Railroad line to orient you. But every type of manufacturing operation that you would need basically to do a car, I mean, kind of like a Rouge plant in that regard, very complete operations. And Pontiac became a very significant driver of American culture. No surprise to anybody. There's hit songs, Little GTO, there's the Monkey Mobile, there's, you know, Here Comes the Judge, and there's Smokey and the Bandit stuff. We actually had all the Bandit people here. The Bandit Run was here 2 weeks ago, which they're still living the dream of the Bandit Run. But it's funny, I mean, they brought Buford T. Justice and the Snowman as well with their vehicles here, but obviously became a huge part of popular culture. And Pontiac continued to innovate until the GM 2010 Chapter 11. I mean, there's still some good product there. I won't go through it because you guys know the more recent product better, undoubtedly.
I just saw Solstice on the road 2
Yeah.
nights ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a quick summary of the community's legacy, which part of what we're up to here is actually to kind of restore Pontiac, the community, with historical legacy tourism and things that help the city. So, I mean, up in the upper right, there's this huge migration of people that occurred, as I think all of you know, between about 1910 and 1950 in this area. And they came from the South, and it's fundamentally what generated all the ethnic diversity in Pontiac. That's why Pontiac is 60% black and 25% Hispanic and so forth, because they basically offered equal opportunity jobs. That the Wilson Foundry in Pontiac would hire anybody that could work that's going to come to work for Wilson Foundry. And a lot of the families here, that's their background. There was a huge housing crisis in the area for many years, like a decade, to the point where GM basically bought up hotels and formed dormitories and so forth. The second thing that's sort of critical is the birthplace of the muscle car, and obviously Pontiac rode the muscle car bandwagon for a long, long time. The earliest and broadest line of trucks is a huge part of Pontiac, and then this whole World War II arsenal of democracy, stuff the city can really be proud of. And Pontiac, the brand itself, has an industry innovation record that's I won't say it's beyond compare, but it's pretty impressive. And it's in manufacturing methods, it's in reinvention of the enterprise, it's in technical first to market, product kind of first to market, and it's in bold advertising. Some of the advertising that you'll see out on the floor, you'll get a kick out of it too. And then there's a people story here that the manufacturing community, again, got formed up as a manufacturing community. Pretty resilient, resourceful, broadly inclusive workforce. There's a whole bunch of industry leaders that came out of Pontiac, including Mary Barra, obviously started at Pontiac, and her dad was a 39-year Pontiac employee. But then, you know, John DeLorean and people like William Woodson, and the wartime trucks, and the women empowerment Pontiac's been pretty aggressive. Let me skip by some of this. And even some of the the stuff that I think is inclusiveness, a record in Pontiac even goes back to Willard Palmer was the first guy that built carriages in Pontiac. It's amazing what you can find out about things that happened in 1838, because he actually had females employed in his business. He had blacks employed in his business, and the census says those blacks came from the South, pre-World War, or pre-Civil War. How they come from the South? Well, he's actually an active and noted abolitionist locally. So there's kind of this empowerment story that goes way back. And there's a bunch of more recent, credits in terms of empowerment too, which I think for brevity won't go through. There's even, Bob and I were talking about this a week or so ago, that Pontiac, arguably most famed designer, is a guy that led the studios in the 60s with all that market growth, and he's of Native American descent. So just sort of jumping then to what's the mission of the place, not surprisingly, it's the products and innovation and people and industrialization, but it's also this stimulate economic growth for the city of Pontiac, do STEAM program outreach, which I think you could argue that a lot of the wealth generation that happened in Pontiac over the period from maybe 1920 to 1955 or so was STEAM generated, that it was really manufacturing capabilities and technologies. And then connecting that history to the current industry presence, which is still a lot around the auto industry in Pontiac. We've done some of the STEM outreach stuff already. This room is a really important part of that, by the way, because there are the kids that come in from the schools and so forth in this room. We're in a historic neighborhood. I don't know if this is obvious to everybody. The red square is our property here, but we're directly adjacent to the Merritt Palmer House, which is an individually recognized National Historic Register thing. And then there's a group of 23 houses that are recognized as the Franklin Historic District. So it's kind of a neat environment to be in. And M1 Concourse, when you start to get an understanding of where all this stuff happened in Pontiac, a lot of it was down around M1 Concourse. There's quite a few of the early vehicle manufacturers right around that M1 Concourse site. It's a three-phase museum development process. We have launched phase 1. Phase 2 and 3 are about a $5 million project. And generally the reaction when we went out for funding for phase 1 was, it's a really good project, we love what you're doing, but come back and knock on our door once you get the doors open. So what you see in phase 1 was largely funded by some pretty visionary and philanthropic individuals. Phase 2 and 3 are going to require some corporate and foundation support. So we have opened the doors now, and it's been interesting as people come back to see us, because I think we've gotten a lot of reactions so far, like, we didn't know you were going to get this far. So it'll be an interesting conversation with the foundation. This is sort of the economic business case for Pontiac, and I won't dwell on this, but some of you kind of know some of the story, but over on the right-hand side, $50 billion is the contribution museums have to the U.S. economy. And believe it or not, it's not because museums make any money, they don't. But it's because basically, when people come to museums, they stay at hotels, they go out to dinner, etc. And so we've kind of played out this story for the city of Pontiac, and I think they're beginning to see pieces of it. For instance, last summer we ran the 40th anniversary of the Fiero thing, which brought 720 people to Pontiac for 5 days. And the mayor was kind of like, where do all these people come from? There's something here. So I think that people are starting to recognize that there actually is something to this business case. And Tim, by the way, has demonstrated that pretty admirably in Pontiac, Illinois, a small town, but they actually fund his museum as a free museum. It's basically funded by the city down there because they recognize the economic benefit. So I don't want to go through that. Where you can help, monetary support, if anybody can write me checks, that'd be wonderful, but helping us find foundation or corporate support is going to be a big part of that. We actually find it, one of the most rewarding things about opening the doors has been, like, people every day, the doors are open, somebody comes with a bunch of artifacts. And some days it's like, why do we want more of this stuff? And some days there's some gold in what comes in. It's really pretty interesting to see. We got lots of room for volunteer help and lots of room for your word of mouth and so forth. If anybody gets excited about engraved pavers, we have an engraved paver program that you'll see
exhibit of?
What else? These are some of the key people that have really been behind this thing from a monetary standpoint, and then lots of volunteer help as well. You can find our website easily, follow us on Facebook and Instagram and so forth. And I just like to get to this slide and say other cities have art museums, but because of Pontiac's heritage, that's kind of why we're doing a transportation museum here. So thank you.
Thank you, Terry.
I have a question.
Certainly.
Next time this is printed, will you be in here?
Yes.
Bob gave us
Definitely.
the ceremonial events of ceremonial, the real stamp today, like literally tonight. And the book had already been printed, but yeah, we're excited to be in that book.
Thank you.
So Terry, you said the grand opening is in July.
Yeah, July 27th, we call it a grand opening, but it's basically a big outdoor event. Museum will be open for whatever it is, 10 hours a day. And we will have ceremonial ribbon cutting and all that kind of stuff.
And from there on, will it be open to the public normal hours?
Yeah, it's open now, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
Okay.
We actually, this is a phenomenon of opening a museum. We pushed pretty hard to let's get the doors open. And we were worried about, are we 100% ready to do a big splash grand opening as we open the doors? And it turned out, just for laughs. So day one, literally the first day, the toilets plugged.
Oh.
And so maybe it's a good thing we didn't have the grand opening the first day. But so that's kind of why we structured this thing with the grand opening in July.
So the slide went by really fast, but did you say on one of the slides you've had 3,000 people through here so far?
I'll say an estimate, because we haven't kept accurate track of it. We've had a lot of people through here. I mean, of course, it's been a 5-year project to get it this far.
So is this replacing the other Pontiac Museum then?
No, why don't you speak to that, Tim?
No, we have no intention of closing that museum. We think there's a great synergy between the two. I've already been taking vehicles and so forth back and forth between the two museums. And we've actually, like on the Bandit Run, I left here immediately to go to the other museum because I have business there, and several people followed me and went to that museum from here. So no intention to close that one.
And we actually have a collection big enough to support both museums. And I mean, you guys know the nature of the beast in terms of the patrons. If they didn't one, they got to go to the other one.
Well, and coming up, we have a very interesting, anniversary coming up, especially for in Pontiac, Illinois. It's the 100th anniversary of Route 66, which we are on there, and the 100th anniversary of the Pontiac. And so we have already got, the museum is doing the Pontiac Oakland Club National Convention here in 2026 on the 100th anniversary of the Pontiac.
Okay. So for those people that are watching the live stream, we're going to say goodbye to you for now, but we're going to encourage you to come here and see it for yourselves, the Pontiac Transportation Museum. For those of you who are here, now it's time to tour the place and see what's here and capture some of that We Build excitement that Pontiac was all about. And there's some refreshments too. So, thank you very much for coming.
All right.